Okay, this weekend, the second trailer for the forthcoming CBS All Access streaming service series, Star Trek Picard, became available for people to see. And I do have some thoughts about it, since this is a relatively recent occurrence in Star Trek. I'm going to go ahead and push a couple things out of the way just to do this video. I've got some work being done in my home right now, so my ability to make videos is a little bit limited, but I could make this, so we're going to go ahead and do that. Okay, full disclosure, I am not watching any of the Secret Hideout Star Trek productions. Secret Hideout is the Alex Kurtzman organization that currently apparently has the license to make television programming for CBS based on Star Trek. The reason why I'm not watching it is because it's crap. It is not. It is just not in keeping with what Star Trek is supposed to be. They drop F-bombs in the show, for crying out loud. I mean, I can't get behind that. Family entertainment is what the show has always been until now, and his choice to do that kind of thing, along with ignoring everything about the other shows, and purposely doing things that seems to tick off us longtime fans. Alex Kurtzman's work is just not something I'm choosing to reward with my time. However, since Picard, the series, does have some familiar faces in it, I may in fact give this one a look. However, the trailers do not bode well. There are some things about them that I do like, however, and I am reserving judgment on the show until I do actually see it, but based off of these trailers, I still don't know if I'm going to bother, given what I'm seeing. But we are going to take a look at this trailer and see just some parts of it that I found somewhat interesting and worth discussing. Okay, the first shot we get is of Chateau Picard. Now this is, I don't believe, the same location that they shot the vineyard at for the show. I believe that was in California. I don't know if this is in California or not. It certainly can pass for the vineyard, however. Shots like this one are actually surprisingly accurate to the tone of TNG. This is one of a couple shots in the trailer that does seem to hearken to TNG quite a bit. However, unfortunately, they're the only ones that do. So, for those of you who don't know, Picard grew up on a vineyard in France, La Barre, France. And at a young age, he ran away from home, essentially, to go join Starfleet, and only came back to visit his family home one time. He did so after about 30 years with the service. Picard had been the captain of the Stargazer for 22 years before becoming the captain of the Enterprise, and so that meant that he was probably gone for at least 30 to 35 years. The next slide, or next shot here, is of a character that looks an awful lot like Commander Data from the original TNG series, painting. Now, this is another one of those golden shots that looks like it could have been filmed by the same people who filmed TNG. So far, so good, right? We're seeing something that looks familiar. We even see, at least from afar, a character that looks an awful lot like Data in a TNG uniform. We also see Picard in his old TNG uniform, or a pretty close approximation of it. You can tell it's not exactly the same, but it is fairly close. The collar is a little bit different in terms of its thickness and things like that, but I'm of the opinion that this is a dream sequence. That's probably why it looks the way it does, kind of like that dreamy sepia tone color palette kind of deal. It's interesting because when you get older, folks, and you start seeing actors age, and let's say you haven't seen them in a few years, and you see them all of a sudden again after, a dozen or so years, it shocks you how old they've become. And this image shocks me, because here Patrick Stewart is in his familiar Captain Picard uniform, and it really shows you how much older he is now than when he wore that uniform back in the day. Picard always seemed older to me anyway. When I first saw him, I was in junior high when TNG began, and I thought, to be honest, he was too old to be the captain. We were used to Kirk, a young, good-looking 30-something captain, and here was this guy who was, pushing 50 as the captain, and I thought, wouldn't it be great if he'd just, retire or get promoted to admiral, and then that Riker guy would be captain. I mean, then we'd have a nice young captain again. I didn't warm up to Picard until after the Best of Both Worlds, to be honest. But anyway, here's Picard looking shockingly old. I do, as I mentioned, believe that this is a dream sequence, given that he is in his old uniform, and it's a uniform that got revised twice. He wore a different one in the first 2 seasons of TNG. Then he wore this one for most of TNG. Then in Generations, they switched over to the new reverse color uniforms that Voyager and Deep Space Nine had, and then finally they also changed their uniforms to the Deep Space Nine kind after, I believe it was First Contact. But anyway, so this is clearly something that is either a flashback or it's taking place in his mind. I tend to think it's in his mind, given what's being said. And next we see what appears to be Lieutenant Commander Data. We can't really see his pips, but this is Brent Spiner with heavy special effects. It's interesting, the color palette here. A lot of people don't know this, but when you were on set with Brent Spiner back in the day when he was playing Data, this is actually what his skin color looked like. If you were in person, with him, you would have this sort of dull yellow, dirty, dingy yellow color, kind of like a Macintosh computer that's been around for a couple of years. That was the color that he actually had on set, but when it was on film, the way it looked when it was on film was that whiter sort of color, and that was a factor of the type of makeup they were using plus the lighting on the show. So here they're actually preserving, this is actually, the same color that you would have seen if you had been on the set with Brent Spiner when he was playing this character back in the day. The problem that I have with it is his hairpiece. That's really the only problem I have with it. It's clearly a hairpiece. It's not done very well. It doesn't follow his original hairline. But for television, this is just fine. Also, given that this is some sort of dream sequence, I'm thinking you can kind of get away with some inconsistencies in Data's appearance. As long as we know it's Data, which we can obviously tell it's supposed to be Data, that's good enough, at least for me. Okay, moving on, we have a scene that takes place in Starfleet headquarters, and we see the only example of a Federation starship anywhere in this trailer, and that is this holographic representation of a Galaxy-class ship. Possibly the Enterprise, possibly a different one, like, the Odyssey or the Yamato. The lack of Starfleet vessels in these trailers does kind of concern me a little bit. Concern might be too strong a word. I notice it. It's like they're trying not to show us what we would like to see, which is, well, let's see what the fleet looks like now, They may be avoiding showing us this for reasons that we don't know at this point. But all the ships that we see in this trailer are possibly civilian vessels like freighters and things, and bad guy ships. We don't see any heroic Starfleet vessels anywhere in the trailer except for right here. Okay, so this next image is an image of what appears to be a Sung-type android, meaning an android like Data. Data, Lore, and B4, and also Lal, I believe, were the only Sung-type androids. Oh wait, no, there was another one too. There was the one that claimed to be Data's mother. There there are very few Sung-type androids, and this one is definitely trying to hearken to Data. He's got the same color palette on his skin, he's also got the yellow eyes, but the designation of Foxtrot 8 on his forehead suggests that we're seeing something that was forecast in we're seeing something that was forecast in the episode Measure of a Man, second season of TNG, in which Data was essentially involved in a courtroom JAG battle to determine his sentience in a legal sense. And Picard was concerned that if they didn't, nip this in the bud, that eventually they could start manufacturing Data-like creatures that would be essentially disposable people. This would appear to be something that represents something very similar to that. Very horrific for the Federation to allow something like that, if that is in fact what we're seeing here. It would potentially be the reason why Picard left Starfleet, because we know he did, based on dialogue from the previous trailer. That would definitely be a reason why an unprincipled person like himself would leave Starfleet. And the next image shows him in the office of an admiral of some kind. We haven't met this character yet, at least we don't think we have. This could in fact be former commander, now Admiral Shelby. It's not the same actress, but it certainly could be that same character, played by a different actress. And I'll tell you, I don't like this at all. While the furniture is very much in keeping with TNG furniture and the table and such, there's no LCARS display type on that computer screen over on the right-hand side. And it's little things like that bother me, because TNG and Deep Space Nine and Voyager had a consistent look, especially with their computer displays, and what we should be seeing is some sort of outgrowth of that. And we're not seeing that. The Akutas are not involved in the show, as far as I know, and they're the ones that I believe that designed those LCAR displays, and that's a shame, because that was an integral part of the look of Star Trek in that era, and in Picard's era, and I think they should have utilized the Akutas for some of those displays, because that would have really, really given us a stronger visual indication that we are in fact looking at the same Star Trek universe as the Paramount television shows of the 90s, 80s, 90s, and the O's. Okay. I didn't like this moment in the trailer, because you basically have Picard shouting at an admiral. Picard's a civilian now. Yes, he's a retiree, but he's a civilian now, and he's basically shouting at an admiral and lecturing to her about what the Federation stands for and such. And this admiral, righteously so, is not having it. I wouldn't have it either. This is very petty on Picard's part, in my opinion. This is like pulling into the drive-thru of a Chick-fil-A and chewing out the girl that works in the window because you don't like something about the political views of the owners of Chick-fil-A. That's about the same level of pettiness, in my opinion. So the next shot here is of that admiral basically telling him to get the hell out of her office, and that this isn't your house anymore. Pretty strong words, especially considering that Picard has literally saved the universe more than once. But apparently that's a representation of his standing now with Starfleet. He apparently really ticked off some brass, and the brass are still ticked off at him, and I'm seeing two evils here, basically. I'm seeing two wrongs not making a right in this scene. The next image I show here is one of Picard's accomplices in this caper that he's about to get underway on. And it's interesting because they chose to film this location next to a very they've decided to film this moment at a very familiar location to Star Trek fans. That rock formation, and I can't remember what it's called. Somebody else will probably shout it out in the comments. I used to know what it was called, but I don't remember it right offhand. That's been seen in Star Trek before, most famously in the episode Arena of the original series, where Captain Kirk climbed to the top of it and then dropped a papier-mâché boulder onto the Gorn captain. Normally when I see this rock formation, I think of that episode. And normally when we see this anywhere else on television or in movies, it's sort of a parody of Star Trek. Thinking of Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, when they were watching this Star Trek episode Arena earlier in the movie, and then later they actually climb up that rock. It's meant as an in-joke. It's meant as a jab at Star Trek, and so using it here, I can't help but think that maybe that's what they're doing here. Okay, the next shot here is of what I believe is Starfleet. Now, Starfleet's headquarters was destroyed in Deep Space Nine, so we assume that they've rebuilt it, and it looks like they have rebuilt it according to the J.J. Abrams style of architecture. It does not look like anything that we saw in TNG in terms of their architecture there. And again, this sort of pulls me out of the whole TNG universe when I see shots like this. That hovering structure also, while cool, doesn't scream Star Trek to me at all. None of this does. It's generic science fiction to me. It lacks the distinctive visual cues of Star Trek, especially the shows that Picard was in. So they failed here as far as I'm concerned. The next two shots rather, are of the only new character in the trailers that I'm actually halfway interested in. This, he's either a Vulcan or perhaps a half Romulan, and he's some sort of samurai. He's got a samurai haircut and a samurai weapon. I'm of two minds when it comes to this character. First, yes, it's interesting to see a Vulcan with long hair and wielding a sword. We know that Vulcans weren't always a peaceful, monastic sort of race. We know that thanks to Enterprise that it did have a barbaric period. Spock on the original series even commented on that. I guess we also saw that in the TOS series Amok Time that the Vulcans were not... they weren't unaccustomed to killing each other with hand-to-hand weapons either, if the occasion arose. But generally speaking, they were a more peaceful, calm, serene, Zen-like sort of logical race that generally didn't like to use violence. That's one of the reasons why Spock used the Vulcan neck pinch. That whole concept of the neck pinch was created so that Spock wouldn't have to participate in fight scenes because he didn't feel that his character would do that. Now we've got what appears to be a Vulcan with a sword. Now this might be, as I mentioned, a Romulan or a Romulan-human hybrid. Like I said, I'm of two minds on this because, one, yes, he looks somewhat interesting. However, two, it's another Vulcan character. I hate to say this, but TNG had introduced us to a plethora of new aliens that were unique to TNG, and I think that it would have been better to have a different sort of character, different sort of alien featured in this Picard show. Having just another Vulcan is... I'm not trying to say Vulcans are boring, but Vulcans are boring now. I mean, we've seen so many. Between Tuvok and three iterations of Spock now. And I would have preferred them give us a Cardassian, maybe. They were prominent in the last few seasons of Star Trek The Next Generation and, of course, on Deep Space Nine. A Bajoran would have been interesting. Again, like, Ensign Ro, somebody from that race, or even just one of the more unusual ones like a Ferengi or a Pakled or a Bainar or any of the other memorable races that were on Benzites. Any of the memorable races that were on TNG. I think going with another Vulcan is just kind of odd to me when you've got this vast potential of alien characters that are more uniquely TNG than the Vulcans are. Okay, this next image is unfortunately what is passing for 7 of 9. Now, I like Jerry Taylor. Excuse me, not Jerry Taylor. Jerry Ryan. Jerry Taylor was my least favorite writer on Star Trek. Jerry Ryan is apparently channeling her inner Linda Hamilton here. First of all, I do not like it when in movies and TV people use two-handed weapons with one hand. This goes for Deadpool too. Deadpool wields two-handed swords, and that is not something that would work in the real world. His grip would slide, and Deadpool should be using two one-handed weapons. Likewise, 7 of 9 here appears to be wielding two rifles as if they were pistols. Now, in movies, if you're a Terminator, it's okay to fire a Mossberg Cruiser shotgun like a pistol. It's got a pistol handle, why not? You're playing a superhuman character. When Judge Reinhold does it, though, in Beverly Hills Cop 2, I have a problem with it because there's no way you could hold onto it, fire it, and not have it fly back and out of control and up in the air. Now, I realize that these are energy weapons. These are either phasers or disruptors or something like that, and so the normal rules of ballistics don't apply, but the visual is still bothersome to me. If somebody can take a rifle and fire it like a pistol, then why is it a rifle? Why doesn't everybody fire it that way? 7 of 9 was a Borg. She had Borg implants in her, and some of them couldn't be removed. She has an artificial eye, but generally speaking, she wasn't Data. She wasn't superhuman in the way that we tend to think of a cyborg being. Now, there might be some obscure reference that somebody has somewhere in Voyager where she was either described as being superhumanly strong or demonstrated something that was superhumanly strong, but my idea here still stands that, firing a two-handed weapon with one hand like this is something that has been overdone, and it doesn't really lend itself to the story or the image of this character at all. Hearing Jerry Ryan speak as this new version of 7 is also kind of disappointing, since 7 had a very unique sort of personality. She spoke like a Hollywood madam. She was very vampy. She would say things like, he wasn't responding to diplomacy. She had this sort of insolent hauteur about her, even though she wasn't trying to have an insolent hauteur about her, just the way she sounded. In trying to sound emotionless, she was actually sounding very, very much like I say, a Hollywood madam. That's all gone now. If we get a new 7 of 9 with a new personality, I would at least like to see some flashback or some moment once in a while where she slips back into that other personality that we know so well, because this, to me, just isn't 7 of 9. This is the actress who played 7 of 9 playing a brand new character with the same name. As you all know, if you watched my introduction to Star Trek videos on my channel, I wasn't a big fan of Voyager, but there were some things about 7 that I did like, and those things appear to be gone now. The next image here is of William Riker in his kitchen. And where else really would he be? This guy loved to cook. Some of the funniest little moments in TNG were Riker trying to cook, particularly when he fed, in the second season, he fed his officer crew Katarian omelet eggs. Katarian egg omelets, I guess I should say. And they all hated them except Worf. Worf was scarfing them down like there was no tomorrow. So he considered that a victory, but everybody else hated his omelets. And so here we see him cooking, and that's very much in keeping with the Riker character. When he was in that awful, awful finale to Enterprise, one of the people on the NX-01 that he impersonated in that holographic simulation was the chef of the Enterprise, a character which we never actually saw or met. So it was kind of interesting. He was able to pretend he was cooking on the holodeck while listening to the various simulations of our favorite characters from that show talk about their simulated emotions and their simulated feelings about things that were being simulated. It's a terrible episode, but Riker was in it and he was cooking, so this is a very good image of him. Now the next image is of him seeing Jean-Luc Picard for the first time and looking very, very old. He actually looks like my dad, except my dad's in a lot better shape. Riker hasn't missed many of his meals here, and he appears to be wearing a girdle underneath his apron. But, again, we're always kind of shocked when we see people that we've grown up watching and seeing what they look like now, and they didn't hold back here. They could have made Riker look a little bit younger. They could have done that, but instead they chose to really emphasize his age now. He looks to be almost in the same age group as Picard is now. They're both basically old men. Okay, this next shot is ruined by the fact that Marina Sirtis is in it. This is Picard meeting his former counselor Troy, now Mrs. Riker, and she's about to give him a hug. Marina Sirtis recently went on record as herself, stating that about 50% of Star Trek fans shouldn't be considering themselves Star Trek fans because of who they voted for in the last election. And I'm sorry, but when entertainers cease to be entertainers and they start saying things like this to alienate a significant portion of their audience, I can't help but see that actor when I see them in something rather than the character they're playing. It makes it impossible for us to separate, or at least very difficult to do it. And right now, whenever I see Marina Sirtis, I think of this person who insulted my fandom. So I'm not able to say very many good things about her right now, so I'm going to go ahead and move on. Another image of Riker here, sitting on a sort of a bench on a pier, overlooking a pond or a lake, and again, they're not holding back. He's sort of squinting here. They could have made him look younger, I suppose, but they decided not to. Like I say, he's really showing his age. He looks like a retired man. His hair isn't all gray, though, so he's still got some color in his hair, and I guess that's pretty good. But this image and the next one and the one after this one have that same golden feeling that TNG used to have. So I kind of like that the trailer began and ended with this kind of color palette that reminds us of the some of the beautiful shots from the old show. Bird of Prey 5 did comment on the fact that Riker had his hand on Picard's shoulder, and Picard reaches over and kind of holds his hand on his shoulder. Old people do this. I've been around a lot of geriatrics, and this is not uncommon. Bird, please stop trying to see sexual things where they don't exist. There was nothing at all homosexual about this at all. This is just how people get when they get older. So get your mind out of the gutter there, man. And the last image of the trailer is a shot of them on this this beautiful shot of them on this pier. And again, this is very reminiscent to me of the first time we saw Jake Sisko on the pilot of Deep Space Nine. He was fishing on a pier very similar to this. And Sisko comes up to him and says, "Hey, we got to get ready. We're going to live on this station." And you find out that they're on the holodeck, and that Jake Sisko was in fact hollow fishing, I guess is what you'd call it. But it was a beautiful color palette, a beautiful on location shot, and again, they have sort of copied that mood for this final shot in the trailer. That's all I'm going to say about the trailer now, other than one more thing. There was a ship that was shown in the trailer, and I'm putting images up of it now. This is interesting to me, because this is a Romulan ship from the original series, the one from 1966 through 1968. A lot of fans choose to call this ship the Romulan Bird of Prey. It was never called that on screen, so I don't call it that. I call it the Romulan Intruder because that's what Kirk called it in the episode. If you actually look at the episode was called Balance of Terror, and it's one of my favorites for obvious reasons. It's basically a submarine movie in space. A character called Lieutenant Styles states to Riker, that he will know if it's a Romulan ship because it will be painted like a giant bird of prey. He didn't call the ship a bird of prey. He said it would be painted like a bird of prey. And thanks to further fleshing out of Star Trek history on the series Star Trek Enterprise, we know that there was a Klingon bird of prey that predated the events in Balance of Terror. So for all we know, Styles may have been in fact referring to a Klingon bird of prey. In any case, generally speaking, Romulan ships are typically referred to as warbirds. I'm choosing not to call this a warbird because I tend to think that that's a term that may have come into use later on with TNG, but I'm just going to call it the Romulan ship. And I happen to like the Romulan ship. I like any ship that has a saucer-centric design. It's a very simple design. But I would love it, absolutely adore it, if Picard and his ragtag crew commandeer this ship and make it theirs for any portion of the show. I would absolutely love that. I would also like an explanation as to why we haven't seen a ship like this before. Either have they traveled back in time? Is this just, an old ship that they found somewhere, or is this just, the Romulans have gone back to their older ship designs after their homeworld was destroyed? Who knows? But it is something that I'm looking forward to finding out. If I in fact watch this show. And again, I am not yet decided. I don't really feel like subscribing to yet another streaming service beyond Amazon Prime just to watch a show like this. If I was living in the United States or wasn't living in the United States, I could watch it on Prime, but I can't because I'm living in the United States. I don't like most of what I'm seeing with this trailer. It just doesn't feel like Star Trek to me, even though we're seeing a lot of familiar faces. I think they're trying, but I don't think they're trying hard enough. And I get the sinking suspicion that even though we're seeing a lot of Riker, Troy, and Data in the trailers, I don't think they're going to be in there very much. I think they're going to be focusing on these new characters that they can flesh out. And, it almost feels like we're being set up for a bait and switch here. But only time will tell. Alrighty, well, this video has gone pretty long here. It's over half an hour, so I'm going to go ahead and call it a night. But I want to thank you for watching and listening to me opine about the virtues and anti-virtues of this trailer. And I will talk to you again very soon. Bye-bye.